Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome. Today we are going to look at an essay by Marshall McLuhan, "The Medium is the Message." Now, before I go into the essay, I want to tell you a little bit about how human beings are a tool making animal. Yeah, human beings are also animals, and therefore, what is it that distinguishes human beings from other animals? And one of the things that distinguishes human beings from animals, as you understand, that life on earth has undergone an evolutionary process through which one life form from another, through a process of natural selection, have evolved into higher life forms. So, one of the without going into this, is not making it a biology lecture, but to understand how human beings actually communicate and how human beings actually function, it is important to understand some important biological changes that human beings had over over other life forms who were earlier in the evolutionary ladder. So, because human beings, when we communicate, what are the things that we use? We use our voice and we use our hands. Whether we are typing out something on a computer or we are writing a letter, we are using our hands. These are and we also use our eyes to be able to receive communication, but in order to create, primarily we use our voice and our hands. So, one important thing about human beings that you do need to understand is human beings, unlike other animals, maybe some of the primates and the precursors of human beings in the ape ladder, they started with the first set of life forms on the earth who do not use our mouth as a tool, as an implement. For example, if I am going to eat something, I am going to pick it up with my hand and put it in my mouth, right? Whereas some other animals, you would know that they will, like birds or dogs or cows, they would pick up their food with their mouth itself, right? This makes a big difference because it frees up the mouth to do other things, and the mouth then takes various kinds of shapes to be able to create the range of sounds that human voice produces. You need a different shape of the mouth, which will not be very useful for picking up food. If we were to eat directly off the plate or of the ground with our mouth, then the mouth will have had to be at a location where we can reach that lower level much easily. The other important thing is about the hands. The human beings are bipedal; they walk on 2 feet, whereas most other animals are use 4 feet, or even birds use their forelimbs to fly, or fish use their forelimbs and hind limbs in a very different sort of way, whereas we have our hands free to do other kinds of activities. So, we can use our hands to do other things. If we stand up straight and our locomotion is not dependent on our forelimbs, then we are able to use our hands for other kinds of activity. That is a very major change. The second important change regarding the hand is the placement of the thumb and the fingers. Now, even so the important point is the grip. For example, if I take this pen, I can grip it, and this is something most animals can't do, right. So, what is important is that the thumb and the forefingers, and even within the primates, if you look at chimpanzees for example, they would have much longer fingers. Okay. So, they will be able to carry something like this, whereas human beings can, because our fingers and thumb, the relation between the two are much closer, we are able to bring it together and make a round like this, which allows the grip, and all the fingers sort of fold in around almost an axis, which allows a kind of grip. It is this grip that makes human beings the tool making animal, and the first tool that people use would be for hunting and gathering and fighting. So, within the evolutionary ladder, those Homo sapiens who would be able to learn to pick up stones or crudely made weapons and throw would gain, because they would be able to hunt better food, number one. Number two, they would also be able to gain by being able to fight. In case of fight between clans, they would have an advantage. So, there is a process where those who are better tool makers survive a lot more in the harsh conditions than the others. So, therefore, this makes a very important change in which human beings become tool making. So, this coupled with the change in the mouth, where we can use our voice to be able to articulate different sounds, and those sounds then take on meanings, and our ability to take tools. So, that allows us to be able to also write, because to be able to write we need a grip, we need to be that is very fundamental to be able to do that. So, Marshall McLuhan says that it is important for us to understand that human beings are tool making animals, and that all media, and this is an important point that you need to understand, we can move to the mind map, and that all media are extension of human senses. So, the television is extension of the eye. In fact, various kinds of machines, so let us say the car, the vehicle is an extension of the feet. So, in similar way, all media are extensions of human senses. So, and he says that this idea of the creating of technology as an extension of the human, it has tremendous consequences, has personal and social consequences. Now, he actually argues against another philosopher who was David Sarnoff, who had argued in this particular essay, Medium is the Message. Marshall McLuhan argues against Sarnoff's contention that the products of modern science are not themselves good or bad, that technology itself is not good or bad, it is how we use it, how human beings use it. In the hands of a good person, it is used in a positive way. If it is in the hands of someone who does not use it properly, it can have very negative consequences. And to suggest, he suggested, Sarnoff gave the example that that maybe print, there is a contention that print, once print comes into being, a lot of trash begins to circulate, and this is an argument that we hear for every single new media innovation. So, when television came into being, people thought, they are going to make people into couch potatoes, and people are not going to now get up and read, it will destroy people's reading habits and all kinds of things. And when the digital media has come about, people are worried. There is a lot of fake news and other kinds of things which digital media brings in. Everybody is writing, we do not know what is correct and what is wrong, people are misguided. These kind of arguments are also being made. So, this is not a very new argument, this argument was made for print. We are going to in later lectures look at this issue closely, but for now let us understand that Sarnoff says that it is a widely held view that print has caused much trash to circulate, a lot of things which do not make sense or not of very good quality get circulated. But print also was used to disseminate the Bible, because remember when Gutenberg printed the first book, he chose to Bible as a prototype, right. So, one of the earliest things that got printed were Bibles, and the circulation of the Bible became a lot more. People could start owning copies of the Bible. Before that, the copies of the Bible would be few and far between, because there would be manuscript copies which would be kept in ecclesiastical libraries, and access would be there only to very few people. But now people could, at least some people could own copies of the Bible, begin owning copies of the Bible. So, therefore, there is much greater, print brings in much greater dissemination of religious thoughts of seers and philosophers, right. But Marshall McLuhan says that this is an incorrect way to look at it, all right. So, Marshall McLuhan argues that this is an incorrect way of looking at technology, and it goes through a complex system of arguments, and I am going to take you through these arguments to disprove what Sarnoff says. He says that usually when we are accessing some text through or what he calls content, we are accessing it using a medium. We are listening, if you are listening to a news story, we can read it on a newspaper or watch it on television or hear it on the radio, and in present day we may read it on a news website, on our phone, or on the computer, on the desktop. And he says that the content of the medium almost blinds us to the medium. We do not pay too much attention to the medium itself, but he argues that the medium shapes and controls the scale and form of human association and action. The way we respond to a particular content is dependent on the way the medium shapes that content. It is very much like, you have so many gallons of water, and if you push it through a very wide pipe, it will come and come at a certain speed. Whereas, if you put it through a very narrow pipe, and it will create greater pressure, and the water will travel much further. So, the form which is used to record and communicate the content actually shapes the way human beings respond to it. And in fact, very often one would say that human beings who are creators of the content are mindful of the form. For example, when I am teaching this course, if I am teaching it in a classroom, I would frame it very differently. But since this is a different kind of a mechanism, where I am principally here speaking to a camera, and I cannot see any students right now, right. They are there in the back of my mind, all of you are there in the back of my mind. I understand that I am explaining it to students. So, I am trying to replicate some of my classroom behavior before the camera in order to explain the things to you, but actually it is not. So, very differently I am trying to frame this lecture, all right. I know that there will be some degree of editing that will go into the creation of this lecture at the end. In classroom, there is no space for editing at all. So, whereas here there is no direct interactivity. At that point of time when I am speaking, I am not seeing any student right before me. This is not a live recording. So, so you have to understand that is something that goes into the creation. What is the form that we are going to use goes into the creation of the kind of content that is there. So, he says, so we will take it through how he actually disproves Sarnoff. He takes us through a series of examples, and all of the examples are not related to communication, but other forms of technology. This is technology brings about change in scale and pattern in human affairs, and he gives, first example he gives is that of the railways. Now, when the railways were first created, they brought in new kinds of cities. New kinds of cities were created. Historically, if you look at the history of humankind, you find that cities were usually created around channels of communication. principally and the banks of rivers, because that will allow for a channel for communication. Or cities will be created around fortresses. This is places of strategic importance. So, there will be a fortress and around that a city will be built, because it becomes the site for the fortress is chosen because of from the security point of view, from a strategic security point of view, which is a geosensitive location, right. And these were two kinds of cities which were the earliest cities that were created, towns or cities or places of habitation that were created in ancient times. You also had cities which were created around trade routes, important points of trade routes. So, if there is for example, the Silk Route or important trade routes between continents, especially between Asia and Europe. So, along the trade route there will be transit points where cities will develop, where people, merchants from various parts would come, exchange their goods and create the bazaar, and that is those were. So, historically these were the places where cities were created. But when railways came into being, we had new kinds of cities, because now the railways are now coupled with other kinds of development across across human history. First of all, you had industrialization, and what industrialization brings in two important changes. One is industry works on raw material, right. So, you get raw material from a factory, then you then in the factory the workers or skilled labor, they work on the raw material and then produce certain goods. So, it helps for the industry to be located near the places of raw material, right. So, that transportation is written. Then the finished product is transported, because you do not need always, and this is something that we are paying the price for today in the form of pollution, is that those parts of the raw material which are exhausts, which have been waste, are then need not be carried to the market, right. You only carry the final produce. So, if you get a very large tree trunk and you cut it and make a wooden table out of it, you do not need to carry the leaves and the branches and other kinds of things all the way down to the factory. You carry only the finished product down to the factory. It becomes much easier, much cheaper. So, therefore, typically these industrial townships are located near spaces of raw material. Now, whether or not a city is located near the where it is located would depend on the railway line. Before that, it was not possible, right. So, the railway line makes these new kind of cities possible. What the railway line also makes the establishment of these cities possible is because the new kinds of work and leisure that come into being. Before that, human beings would not have this sense of clock time. It is somehow, it makes it is important exercise for us to imagine ourselves in a different historical time period. Today, everything, as I speak, there is a clock ticking away, and I am aware that so much time is passing by. But this is something that is may not have been the case. That certainly would not have been the case with people 600, 700, 800 years ago. With this kind of awareness of the clock time. The clock time is something that develops after the industrial era, where production becomes linked to a certain target. The raw material has to be brought in. There is a certain investment has been made, and the returns to investment will have to be calculated on the basis of when the goods are sold in the market, you recoup. So, there is this entire cycle, and therefore, time becomes very, very important. Whereas, before that, time was more seasonal or diurnal, when the sun rises and when the sun sets. That was a sense of timing. There was a sense of timing of when to plant a certain crop, or when to harvest, when the rains will come. So, these kind of or in case, for example, in case of fishing, one would know when is the time when the fish would come to the shore, or when the fish would come to fresh water, and that is when the fishermen will go and catch the fish. So, there was a very different sense of time, but with the coming of industrial age, you have a new kind of division of work and leisure, where people would work for some time and there would be a certain degree of leisure time also. All right. That distinction between work and leisure was it was determined by clock time and rather than seasonal or diurnal time. People, of course, in the early industrial age worked for workers made to work for very long hours, 13, 14, 15, 16 hours, perhaps even more than that. You know, if you read Charles Dickens's novels, you would find that some of the characters, they work for a very long duration during the day. But still there was this distinction between what is work time and leisure time. And what it does is that it is linked to the way the railways function, is because this kind of distinction then means that people have to move from their place of birth to this township, and the railways make those channels of labor also possible, that the labor has to report to work and then go back when there is a break, when the production stops, they go back, and it makes labor available to these townships. All right. And without the railways, it is very difficult to imagine this kind of industrialization. All right. So, and what the railways do once they come into being, the way the railway functions, it replicates this kind of pattern in other places. For example, if there are railways which go to administrative centers or tourist centers, there also, you know, time becomes very important, because the train has to leave at a certain time, because large number of people are travelling on the rail on the same train. So, what he is saying is that the invention of the technology of railway brings about certain changes in the way human beings conduct their affairs. Then he moves to the other technology of the electric light. Okay. So, he says with the availability of electric light, certain kind of activities, it could be a brain surgery, or people can be playing a sport at night. This could not have existed without electric light. All right. So, it eliminates space. So, eliminates space time factors. Okay. Electricity as such, not only electric light, but electricity also. There are many other things that are brought about by electricity: telephone, telegraph, radio, television. Various of each of these are examples of what is brought about by electricity. And what the telephone or the telegraph make possible is communication. Each of them have their own specific requirement. Like, for example, radio or television, they are centrally organized, isn't it? I mean, there is a television studio where the recording happens, and then it gets uplinked and goes to somebody's home, and the person can watch it on the TV set. And it is an appointed hour, unlike, for example, this particular recording, which you can watch at your own leisure. Whenever you have time, you can watch it. You can start a video or scroll to that particular timestamp and watch it from there. Suppose this video is an hour long video, and you have earlier watched it to 33 minutes. You can start watching it from the 34th minute onwards now. All right. So, that is something that is made possible, whereas so there are various kinds of changes that each technology makes possible, but everything is put together in the form of through the emergence of electricity. These kind of relationships between the creators of the texts and the recipients of the text, creators of the message and the recipient of the message, would not have been possible without electricity. And he says that though electricity itself does not have any content of its own, he says it is probably a medium without a message, but that is almost the reverse of what he had, what he is trying to suggest is, because the medium may be without the message, but it is framing the message. The medium is in a certain way is making us behave in a certain sort of way, and that almost becomes pervasive. It goes across the board in all kinds of activities. The impact of a certain small technological change can be far reaching in human affairs. So, one of the things that he says, electricity ended sequence and made things instant. So, for example, what he says is that you know that the distinction that is there between machine and automation. He makes a distinction between machines and automation. So, he says machines alter our relationship with one another. Now, look at this. So, some of you may have watched this film by Charlie Chaplin called Modern Times, where he looks at how machines are and their effect on people and working lives. It's a very satirical sort of a very satirical presentation of the impact of on machines on modern life. I strongly recommend that you watch that movie. Okay. So, he says if you look at non-automated machines which are mechanical, there, for example, when the in a car, when the, so let us understand a bicycle probably is a better example. The bicycle, you press the pedal and the wheels move, and there is a direct relationship between you pressing the pedal and the cycle moving. Compare it with a drone or for example, a washing machine. A modern washing machine does not require you to turn a lever in order to let the motor go, right. You switch something on and all the changes that are happening are regulated through a wired circuit, right. And that is something when electricity enters into the field and electrical circuits enter into field, you have automation. Okay. So, the controlling of the speed in a car or in a bicycle is made through a gearbox, right. It is all mechanical. So, if you put it in a certain gear, then it will you are pressing on the accelerator or the the gas will increase the speed of the car in a certain sort of way. Whereas, if you have to change the setting, the program on a washing machine or a microwave oven these days, you do not actually, there is your action of pressing the button is not mechanically linked to how the motor moves. It is linked through a circuit. The circuit takes over. Now, the circuit is giving a certain instruction, it is regulating it according to the amount of electricity that goes in or not. You, while pressing the button, you are not regulated. For example, if you look at old kind of earlier, you would have the mechanical regulators of fans, where you are turning. If you turn the fan to 5, it will actually move the wire to a certain point where a certain electrical frequency will go in. Sorry, I am not very versed with all the technologies, but I can just communicate the idea to you that when you are turning the regulator of a mechanical regulator, you are actually controlling the energy that is going to into the fan and which is making it to move at a fast or a slow pace. Whereas, the digital regulator would merely instruct the circuit to send that much electricity into the fan or not. All right. So, that is the distinction between earlier machines and automation. Now, he says this makes a tremendous degree of difference, because machines were fragmentary. You had to have people at different parts of the assembly line in order to work on a specific problem. But because they were fragmentary, it needed a lot more centralized control. You understand, there is kind of a negative relationship, inverse relationship between the two. The more fragmentary a production process is, the more centralized it needs to be. Whereas, with automation what happens, because there is greater depth and it is integrated to the production process, you can regulate what exactly happens at that particular spot at a at a local level, and that change can also be can show up on a dashboard in the control room. So, the control room is now able to give a lot greater autonomy for that particular local the final point of delivery. All right. So, though decision making in within automated universe is much more decentralized, it is actually integrated a lot more, because why do you need centralized? So, for example, if I am producing a pen cap which has a different diameter, then if I am making a pen which has a different diameter, then the fellow making the cap, the person who is making the cap, will also have to increase the size of it. They can't change that decision themselves, right. Whereas, in an automated system, if there is a change in the diameter here, that will automatically show up on somebody else's screen, and they will know, and they will be able to make that small change without referring to that central authority. So, therefore, the mechanical world needed a lot more central authority, but the automated world does not require central authority that much more, and that will tell you that you can now custom make a lot many more goods. You know, you get a lot more customization. Many of these companies, when they are producing and selling things, let us say in India, but machines which are things which have been designed elsewhere, when they are producing it for India, they are customizing it for the Indian market, or maybe for even within various markets within India. It is possible with automation, that kind of decentralization, whereas in a mechanical world, that centralization would be required. Now, that is purely a technological change. So, the electricity actually ended this sequence, it made things instant. You could make small changes during the process and make that possible. Okay. He also talks about movies. What movies do, very interestingly, if you understand what movies are basically, if you look at not digital movies, but mechanical movie cameras, they were taking series of photographs, and because of our eyes are not able to see pictures above a certain frame rate, when those series of photographs are projected onto the screen at a certain speed, what we see is a moving image, isn't it? So what movies were sheer speeding up of the mechanical. So, now what it does in the moving image, it is actually moving from a transition from a linear sort of connection to that of a different kind of a structure. So, because you could now play with illusions, what movies could do was superimpose one image on another. That is something that is possible. Now, if you what movies in any case would do with a mechanical camera is that they would record separate photographs, and one photograph is imposed on another, and the two are put together, right, for a split second as the film moves on through the camera, right. So, now you can play with it. You can now, it makes possible of imposing two images together, or playing two kind of sequences together and creating a montage, creating a kind of illusion, right. This gave rise to new kinds of art forms like cubism, which played the interplay of planes and created this dramatic conflict. So, imagine they could show the face of a monster and the fear on the face of the people who are running away from it on the same plane. They have been shot separately, but they have been sort of superimposed together, and they are being played out. That is something that can be possible with this kind of technology that brings it to being. This would not have been possible in other form of media. All right. So, and when cubism comes into being, people would ask, what is this painting about? But the answer is that painting is not so much about something, but about the medium itself, the way human beings are now interacting with images and ideas, and that is what Cubism as a movement actually tries to encapsulate, tries to bring forward, tries to critique, right. Now, he moves to the other important communication technology, and that of print. So, print had, and we are going to discuss this later on in the course at a much greater detail. Print has a very far reaching impact on human life, especially during the since from the Renaissance, from the time the print was discovered, the first printing machine was created. In fact, scholars have argued that print played a very important role in creating revolutions across Europe. And so, for example, the French Revolution and other similar democratic revolutions that took place in Europe around the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries is something that was a result. Print had a very important role to play as a tool for communication. We are going to look at all that in later lectures, but for now, one of the points that he is speaking of is that after the French Revolution, there was a sea change in the way in which France was governed, all right, or conceptually, I mean, France was governed. The important point to be noted here is that the movement from monarchy to more democratic parliamentary sort of politics is something that was brought about by a change in the constitution. The change that happened within France, where the king of France was guillotined, and the argument was for liberty, equality, fraternity, is that argument actually brought about changes in constitutional changes. So, this was an important moment in history where you had a change of constitution because of a certain medium, all right. Just to explain the point, he takes two other nations. One is England. England, even today, we have they have a constitution which is primarily based on customary or oral laws. There is no one, you cannot pick up a book and say this is the constitution of England or the United Kingdom. There are sets of customary laws, there are sets of statutes, there are sets of legal judgments, and the law, the sense of the law is derived from that. So, what he says is that unlike in France, in England, the shift from the oral world to the print world never really happened. Whereas in America, the American Constitution is a very landmark text in the history of human politics, and in fact, the Indian Constitution takes a lot of leaves out of the American Constitution, because it was, so to say, imagined as a new world. Okay, that is a colonial vision where they did not recognize the rights of the Native Americans at that point of time. But so therefore, they were beginning without any examples of any medieval institutions. So, they were writing from scratch. This is a book that was written from scratch, whereas in the French Revolution, they had to derive part of previous medieval institutions and then change it to modern institutions, and that was something that was brought about through the changes in the constitution. So, each of these three nations bear very different relationship in the constitutions of these nations bear a very different relationship between the shift from the oral to the printed world, all right. And this importance of print was something that was extremely well fathomed by the rulers of that time. You know, we do talk about the French Revolution as this bringing about this democratic change within France, but what happened really was that it gave rise to a new monarch, so to say, in the form of Napoleon for the next years following the French Revolution. That is for a history lesson to figure out. But Napoleon was very much aware of the power of print. He says that 3 hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. So, the power of the print is something that that Napoleon realizes, that at the level of ideas, the battle has now shifted to the level of ideas rather than merely to the in the battlefield. So, guns, it is not only important to have good guns, it is also important to be able to control the print, because newspapers can articulate a certain views among the people, and that can be very dangerous for the rulers. And so, the rulers take cognizance of it and decide that how they are going to govern or administer the media in to be able to help them govern the country in a certain sort of way according to their administrative vision. In the concluding part of the essay, McLuhan looks at this novel by E.M. Foster, Passage to India, to describe a certain conflict between the East and West, and also to thereby explicate his idea of how technology is actually frames the change of technology, frames the message, the content. All right. He says that, you know, there is this particular the central incident in Passage to India is where there is this young British girl called Adela Quested, who visits India, and there she meets an acquaintance who is Dr. Aziz, and there is a particular incident where the two of them visit a cave. They have gone out for an outing along with their friends and family, and they wandered off during a conversation into a cave, and when they come out of that of the cave, then the world falls apart, because there is an accusation that on Dr. Aziz, that he has tried to molest Adela Quested. Now, it is not clear as to who is saying the truth, because what McLuhan importantly tries to suggest is that there cannot be any final word on what the truth really is. He says, because there is a long legal battle after the incident, and Adela Quested is not able to testify very clearly what happened within the cave, because there could have been other people or there could have been animals within the cave as well. But McLuhan looks at it very differently. McLuhan looks upon it as a conflict between the East and the West, in a way in which and how the legal system actually operates. Because the West is largely, in this case Adela Quested and all our British friends and acquaintances, they belong to a universe which is more attuned to the printed form, right, to the written form, whereas Dr. Aziz belongs to a world in India which is more attuned to the oral form. So, oral testimonies and testimonies in a legal print legal universe work very differently, and the two do not come together, they do not understand each other. The West tries to frame the East as irrational, but the world of the oral has a different sense of reason than the world of the print. This is something that we are going to look at later on in the course as well. But print, it operates in a certain sequence. The way when a book is organized, in the case of writing, we move from point A to point B through point C. That is how it is organized. The page numbers are organized like that, like page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, that sort of brings in a certain kind of sequence. But in case of orality, it is they are much more they are not sequential. It is very much like the mind map that we are reading right now. The mind map, I can move from point A to any particular point I want to cross refer to another point, I can easily do that. I can add some other point very easily down there together. So, the oral world works very differently from the print universe, and the way people think within a printed universe is very different from the way people think or operate mentally in an oral universe. All right. So, that distinction is something that he says is the bone of contention. That is what leads to this confusion in the understanding of what happens in that cave in Passage to India. So McLuhan is, to understand what McLuhan is really saying, he is saying that the medium that is used to communicate actually frames our ways of understanding content, our ways of understanding of what is being said, and that is something that usually human beings are not very aware of, and he is actually trying to make people aware of that. So McLuhan's entire effort in this essay is to underscore the importance of studying the medium and looking at what is it that the medium brings in. For example, he looks at situations where a movie can be based on other texts. I mean, movies can be based on an opera or a novel or a play, but when the movie comes into being, many a times we have seen movies films which have been based on a novel, for example, or a play that we have read or seen. But while watching the movie, people think that this is the play, but it is not the play. It has been reframed. It is a separate script that has to be written for the film itself, right. So, he says both writing, print as well as movies, all of them contain speech, but it is not the same speech. The speech in a novel is not the same as the speech as in the content which is there in a novel is not the same as that in a movie, right. It is very similar, and even if you take a movie and if there is let us say a serialized version, if it is a TV series, then that would also be framed very differently from that of the movie. So each form has its own implication on the way a certain content is delivered, and McLuhan says the reader is almost entirely unaware of either print or speech. So the reader usually does not pay any attention to what is the medium that is being used, but the medium is important. That is what he is trying to say, all right. And he says that the effects of technology do not occur at the level of opinions or concepts, but alter the sense of ratios or patterns of perception steadily without any resistance. So, the point is that these changes that are brought about in specific technologies, these technological changes are not completely dependent on people's opinions. Technological changes happen, people do not say that, so when we say that the print, when Stanford he says that the Bible is being used, print is being used to talk about the Bible or to transmit the Bible among people, among audiences, does not mean that is the reason why print has been put into place. The way the print is shaped, after that what happens to the technology can almost be beyond the control of everybody involved. While creating the technology, we are always not able to be aware of its larger implications. It says this change does not depend on the approval or disapproval of those living in society. What that change in technology would bring about, what kind of changes that change of technology would bring about, is often not cannot be controlled by those who created the technology. Okay. For example, if you look at the internet, the first if you look at the history of the internet was created resulted through a program, a government program to prepare for the consequences of a nuclear Armageddon. So, if there is a nuclear war and there is an important data center where data is stored and that gets destroyed, that will lead to a serious difficulty of administrative functioning, and serious also may if it is a military data center, that would lead to a serious difficulty in functioning during war. So, therefore, they try to figure out if the data can be decentered and yet there could be interlinked. So that if one part of the network is wiped out, the data can be restored from other parts of the network. I mean, this is very similar to the kind of torrent technologies and other kinds of technologies that we hear of today, where data is communicated between various systems in packets, not as a whole, right. So, the packets of data could be distributed across the network, and therefore, if one particular data center or storage stops functioning, either due to some technical fault or due to acts of war, then all the data and all the functioning is not lost. Now, this was what the internet had created. This was primarily a military project, but look at where we are today. Today, that decentering has resulted in greater possibilities of civilian use. It is no longer merely a military development, it is now of a technological development of gigantic proportions, which has brought about sea change in the way human lives are operating. So, therefore, the creators of the technology do not always have the key to what would be the social or political or economic cultural implication of that technology, but those implications are there, because the medium does frame the message, and therefore our principal task here is to understand how the medium is framing the message. So, when in this course we go and look at the transmission of ideas, human ideas from through various technologies. Firstly, we use our voice in the form of oral work. Then there is in the form of oral records or oral communication, or stories, poetry, ideas, songs. Then you have inscriptions on stone walls or caves, pictography, pictures being drawn, to the invention of writing, the alphabet, and the vowel is born, then the words are born, and various kinds of forms which are transformed there, to the coming of print, to the coming of the digital world, the electronic media, to the digital media. We are going to look through these phases of history to see how in each of these cases the medium is framing the message, and therefore medium becoming the message. In the next lecture, we will look at another essay by Marshall McLuhan. Thank you.